So I'm here with Kim Inslee and Ryan Davenport, two former journalists who have since moved into PR and are on the Pineapple team. Thanks for joining me to chat about the changing media landscape and what all of this means for the future of journalism and communications. So before we start, can you guys quickly introduce yourselves?
I'll go first. Okay, so you did it all. I'm Kim Inslee. Used to work in television in the Twin Cities and now work in public relations. Eyeing retirement at some point, but yeah, that's my story.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm Ryan Davenport, and I'm also a former television reporter in Duluth and the Twin Cities, now a PR consultant and part of the Pineapple team. So it's great to be here, and sounds like a great topic. I'm looking forward to it.
So, what was the biggest surprise you encountered when moving from journalism into PR?
You want to go first, Ryan?
Sure. I would say that it was a culture shock. Um, I'm not used to drafting quotes and then having someone approve them. That was hard for me. I almost felt like I was in the wrong, like, am I in the right place for the job? I didn't know how that would even go. I thought I was supposed to send the release with blanks and have them write it. And they're like, oh my gosh, no. So that was one thing. And then just sort of understanding how agencies work. And that was my experience, was that I went to an agency and quickly realized I was not in Kansas anymore. I mean, there's chaos in a newsroom. It's exciting, and I'm sure going the other direction would be hard, like entering the newsroom for the first time. And I know that was scary for me too, but it was a, it was a big change.
I wholeheartedly agree. So the first time I did a news release and I was telling my boss, and I'm gonna, go in so and so's office and get a quote from them. And she's like, no, 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 no. You will write it. And I thought, oh, that's sacrilegious. That was very hard. Very, very hard.
No one
Um,
told me that that was how it worked. How did I not know that? That was such a rookie, like, I just went blank. Wait, I'm sorry, write the quote?
it's
Mhm.
yeah, it's not what we're trained to do. But ideally, you know your person well enough that you kind of know what they would say when you're writing a news release and it's involving another entity and you're making up a quote for them. I will try to get their people to do that first, but if not, to expedite it, I'll write it myself. Um, I was surprised at how much strategy goes in on the PR side into, what gets presented to the reporter. And I do continue to wrestle with sometimes there's so much overthinking, there's paralysis because of it. And so the news side of me is like, oh my goodness, just get this thing out. You know, sometimes it's brain surgery, but many times it is not. Um, and then just the wrestling with the people that you may work for who have a tough time understanding that what's news and big and important to them is not necessarily news and big and important to anybody else. And so trying to get a level set on expectations with people on what is a news story and what is not, or how can you be involved in this news story. And there's a great deal of fear, and I understand it in terms of businesses not want, kind of wanting to keep their head down, especially now, I think. That can be frustrating because I think there are a lot of good stories that go untold because of that fear.
Mhm.
But for a lot of the people in journalism, and Ryan, maybe you have former colleagues who come up and ask you about this, it is not the flip side. PR is not the flip side of journalism. It's a whole different animal. And so it's really been exciting to learn something new that I have enjoyed. And so you kind of, you just realize you're in a different profession.
Mhm.
No, you are. I've heard people say flip side. I've heard them say dark side. You're going to the dark side. But it is a whole different thing. And I think for me, what was important to remember was that, I was I made the transition because we brought marketable skills. We brought, important tools in the toolbox that sort of set us up for success in PR once you get over the culture shock of PR and knowing how to keep a story tight, well written, how to write a lead. That comes into play. And yeah, there's going to be a lot of push and pull. We want to stress our flavor enhancing product that, brings vitality to, and I'm like, I don't know if any of this, is that proven? Are we able to say that? I mean, you have to push back and ask questions that I think sometimes people might kind of look at you sideways. But I think it matters because I think these are kinds of things that reporters will challenge you on in terms of what kind of adjectives you use to describe things, and making sure that you can back up what you have in that news release. Because the last thing you want to do is get into a situation where we're part of a PR push that kind of gets taken apart by reporters, and you kind of set your client up for some hard discussions, right? So I like to remember that I was brought, I earned a role in PR because of my knowledge of how newsrooms operate, at least the knowledge at that time. And certainly newsrooms have evolved, and I know we'll get into that. But it was a great transition. I was kind of cooked in TV. I was ready to make a change, and so it's been a great experience. And being in PR has been really fun.
So building off that kind of previous topic, do you feel that being a former journalist gives you an advantage in the world of PR? For example, is it easier for you guys to be pitching newsrooms? And do you think people, maybe pay more attention to you guys when you pitch?
I think there's an awareness of when and how and sensitivity toward what that journalist is going through, what their job might look like. I don't view journalists as the enemy. And I've met a lot of people on the PR side, not the PR practitioners, who view journalists as enemies, but executives who may view journalists with a very, very wary eye. And most of them are just trying to get their job done. And they don't want to be lied to, and they don't want to be presented with garbage. And they need access when they need access. So I find that I can make a case for things sometimes by saying, this is the reality of this person, and this is what we need to provide. And that does have its advantages. And then I agree with everything Ryan just said. You bring with you the training and the ethical background that makes sure that your client doesn't get into trouble by claiming something that may not be true.
And I would echo what Kim said in that there is a circle the wagons kind of mentality sometimes with corporate cultures, depending on who your clients are, and not always, but I worked at an agency and then transitioned into a role in public relations at a company. This, in my case, a healthcare organization, and we can kind of serve as a interpreter about how newsrooms work. We can kind of translate a lot of technical information that a company might be inclined to put out that won't mean a lot. It won't ever get to the viewer or the reader or the listener. And so, it's great to have the skill set to be able to translate, okay, so that sounds like really technical information. How do we convey this in a way that a reporter would have time and the wherewithal to repeat it? And how would we like that to look in a newspaper or on TV or in a trade pub? And so that's really fun, actually. I enjoy that. And, the other thing I forgot to mention is that when we're in TV, we see all kinds of public relations copy. We see press releases. We see big fancy kits, at least back in the day when, not that long ago, but you would receive physical items and food and all kinds of samples. And I kind of promised myself that, if I got into public relations, I would take my experience receiving press releases and do a better job. And not, some releases were great, well written, but a lot of them were just written very generically, not targeted me or anybody in our newsroom, and probably kind of in the wrong market. But
Yeah. So
um,
following up on that, what do you think is the number one mistake that PR professionals have made while pitching newsrooms?
I mean, there's so many mistakes, but I don't know if there's a number one. Kim, what do you think?
I think not understanding what the reporter does. So you want to do some research on who you're pitching. Do they cover the type of story that you're talking about? If it's a TV reporter and you know that they don't work weekends, don't pitch them something that's happening on a weekend. If it's a newspaper reporter and they cover um, real estate, don't pitch them something in education. Or if you know someone, and I do find it is helpful to know someone in organizations and just say, who do you recommend I send this to? And most people are really generous on trying to get you to the right person. Also understand that it's okay. Working in television, sometimes we would miss on my show, we would miss out on something because we didn't know about it. And the person would be like, oh, well, I sent it to your assignment desk. Guess what? The assignment desk does not generally share those things with any of the shows per se, unless you're part of a certain meeting where that might happen. And so sometimes you need to understand that if it's a morning show that you need at your event, pitch the morning show and the assignment desk. It doesn't hurt to do both, but understand who you're sending that pitch to and why, and make sure that it includes the things that they're going to want. Don't pitch someone who works in a visual medium a story that has no visuals.
Sure. So
Right.
let's start.
Yeah.
Sorry, Ryan, do you want to finish up?
Well, just that it can be really complicated, especially if you're pitching to a market in which you don't live, right? So if a client says, we want to do a big media push in Lexington, Kentucky, it will be really helpful to do some homework, right? And figure out who's there, what are the media options, and how much information can you get online? How much are you going to have to, make some phone calls like Kim talked about? I mean, that's really great advice. And then, make your pitches kind of strategic. I don't think there's a one size fits all. And knowing where to go can be pretty hard. So maybe you have to cover a few bases, right? Maybe the morning show people, there could just be so many different variables. And so any kind of intel you can get on the front end will give you a better chance. And still acknowledging that if you're out of market, it's going to be tough to get something in that market, because how do you make it relevant and local, right? So there has to be a connection or a reason for the media outlet you're targeting to do the story. And so that's the whole thing. If you don't have any way to connect, it's going to be a tall task.
Before we start delving into kind of the idea of what's going on in the newsrooms themselves, I wanted to ask you one last kind of question about the interplay between journalists and PR people. Do you think there's been any changes in that relationship in the past 5 to 10 years?
I think that I have always enjoyed working with really good public relations people because they always understood, what I needed from my end. I respect those who present me with things that are useful, and if they're forced to pitch me something that's not, I've had PR people say, you know what, this isn't the greatest thing in the world, but here's what I can do. And I've also called up public relations people at times when I needed a segment. Hey, do you have anyone who can talk about this? And that comes from long-standing relationships. And I don't think that that's changed. If anything, given the shrinking of the newsrooms, I think relationships are more important than ever.
Yeah, we've definitely experienced that.
I would agree. I think it's all about relationships. It's getting to know when you can, getting to know sometimes you just don't have that luxury, but if you can make a connection, I think news is still news. And so if you're pitching something that's kind of featurey or not a hard news thing, you have to take a different approach, right? And And but I think it's important to do your best to kind of understand who's on the other end of that interaction and why they might be interested. And bringing news judgment into your pitch is really nice if you're in that. And it's not just, former news people aren't the only people who can be successful in PR. I don't mean to say that. But having a sense of how newsrooms work and how journalists work is really important. And I just happen to be in that position where I brought some of that, but you can certainly learn that too. So it's for everybody to kind of figure it out.
It's the non-journalist in the room. I always like to say every pitch that I do has to contain a so what? Why would this matter? What is the reason that I'm reaching out to you?
Yeah, that's a good kind of way to check yourself before you push that out.
So let's start talking newsrooms. What do you guys think is the most important trend that's reshaping journalism today? What comes to my mind, of course, are shrinking newsrooms, AI, audience trust, and even how people are moving in that, social media personalities are now reporters, essentially.
Consolidation. And I have seen it on obviously everybody is aware of the whole Jimmy Kimmel thing and all of that. We're in a very weird situation right now, but to have these huge station owner groups merging with other huge station owner groups on the television side is alarming, because the synergy there is to, and I've seen it here, is to have a hub where the news is produced out of the hub, and then you have some reporters in the smaller markets. So you lose local coverage that way. On the newspaper side of it, we've seen large equity type organizations come in and just suck the newsroom dry. Cut all the reporters. From last week, the Dallas Morning News had Hearst, I think it was Hearst, wanting to buy the Dallas Morning News, and then an equity company that I won't name kept trying to increase the offer because they wanted it. That particular company was known for gutting out newsrooms, and the stockholders of the Dallas Morning News went with the known journalist entity, pretty much saving this wonderful, long time, very important newspaper. So in other markets, it hasn't been like that. So consolidation, which forces smaller newsrooms, less coverage, more work, lower pay. It's very hard to journalists right now.
And generally speaking, less opportunities for companies, for PR people to tell their story, forcing a shift to the idea of owned media versus earned media.
We have news deserts all over the country now, and that's terrifying.
It is terrifying, and I completely agree with what Kim is saying. And what I worry about, in addition to that, is the fact that people are discounting journalism as a legitimate source of information. And when we begin to have, there's a climate in this country now in which we don't trust what is coming from certain media outlets. And I think it's important. First of all, I think it's as a democracy, we have to have a press that can operate unencumbered by government, and it's First Amendment stuff, and that matters. Facts matter. It's important to people have choices where they get their news, and I think it's the industry is under assault right now. And so as a former journalist, it really strikes at my core, because I worry about keeping the public informed with as many voices and established journalistic principles, because there are too many people now embracing information that isn't accurate, that comes from non-credible sources. When we start to question as a country the validity of established journalistic organizations like the New York Times or National Public Radio or just, so many great, you mentioned the Dallas Morning News. We're not a free society if we can't rely on a free press. And so, that's big stuff. I mean, it's like world hunger. And this is a really scary time for reporters, for journalists, for independence in reporting. So, I want to say that ultimately we'll get through this and we'll get to a place where we can reestablish a connection and the trust of the people who consume news. But this is a hard, difficult time now. And I fear for journalists who are under duress by people who don't trust them. And then I don't think we can make informed decisions. So this is where we are.
And as insiders of newsrooms, what would you say to the people who do say, oh, journalists are biased or have these kind of opinions of, the legacy media can't be trusted anymore?
I think it's a good question. Can the legacy media be trusted when we've seen some things happen that tell us that business decisions sometimes supersede other decisions? I think smart companies will leave their newsrooms alone, but we have seen even that breached somewhat. I think that it's really difficult when we are losing collectively our critical thinking skills, where people will see something that's coming from a source that maybe they like the opinion of that source, and so they tend to believe it. But you need to have news from many different sources in order to critically think about that thing that's being talked about and decide whether or not what you're reading is true. And then the other thing is for journalists to keep expressing what a journalist really is. A journalist isn't someone that goes out and holds up a cell phone at an event and then puts that on social media. That's someone who is showing you something. But a journalist comes with training, skills, ethical considerations. And yes, journalists are people, and yes, they do have their own opinions. But as a journalist, you don't write your story or tell your story based on your opinion. You do it based on the factual reporting that you've done.
So we've been seeing a lot of reporters, very legacy, well-known people that are going independent and launching their own podcasts and Substacks. What are your thoughts on that? And how do you think that how do you think that would work with the PR profession? I mean, should PR practitioners be reaching out to them or respect that they are being independent and doing their own thing?
It's a great question. I think on one hand, it's not necessarily a bad thing that a respected journalist goes a different direction and leaves a newsroom. I mean, we hear in so many cases that people make decisions to leave newsrooms because the independence of that newsroom has been compromised. And I can understand a reporter saying, this is not what I signed up for, right? If a story gets, doesn't make air because corporate executives don't like the message that goes behind it, or they're afraid of a reaction that, if reporters are doing their job, like Kim said, reporters are reporting on the facts, they're reporting on what they observe, they're reporting on what the people involved in that story have to say about it. And the reporter should take all the opportunities to get a perspective on this that may not be the same, right? Just interviewing one side or the other side. And it isn't balance this with balancing that. It's understanding what the news is and how people are going to react to it. And so, in some cases, I think it's okay. I think it's maybe a good thing. I mean, podcasts can be really helpful, really informative. And there are a lot of podcasts out there that provide more context than can be available in a half-hour news program, right? In a newscast. Mm-hmm. So, they become sort of another source. And if they're led by journalists, people who have the experience in reporting news, or as writers, you think about some of the long form writing that comes in publications like the New Yorker or the Atlantic, or even, I mean, National Review. I mean, there are longer form stories that can bring a much deeper take. But if a reporter is deciding to make a change because the reporter now has a political point of view that needs to be, that person would like to make larger, to amplify, then I have concerns about it. You certainly take it with a grain of salt. This is I do believe in free speech, not just free speech for certain people, right? So go ahead and follow your passion, but just understand, as a consumer, understand what you're listening to and how it fits in, right? Who's reporting, who's making the opinion, and knowing the difference between news and commentary is pretty critical.
Very critical. But I also want to address your question about how do PR people look at that. A lot of the people who are doing their own Substacks and whatnot are doing it on a very narrow topic. So it would be really hard, I think, unless you are part of that topic,
Yep.
to interact with that person in a meaningful way. But that doesn't mean that you don't look at podcasts and things that may be very right up your alley for the industry that you're pitching for. So I think it takes a lot of homework to understand what that's about. And I see that many of the journalists who are doing Substacks are not doing it so that they can interact on a sponsorship side. They're looking for subscribers. So it's a different business model.
So I want to dig in a couple more questions about the newsroom and then go back to what all of it means for a PR profession and for our clients. But one other topic I really want to touch on in terms of newsrooms is, are we seeing AI infiltrating newsrooms, and how is AI being used by reporters?
There was a case here. So I'm in Madison, Wisconsin right now, and there was a reporter who put out an article on, it was a construction thing going on downtown. And somebody else at one of the smaller newspapers read the article and thought, oh, some of this stuff sounds kind of weird. They did some digging into it, and it turns out that some of the stuff in the article was generated by AI, which was hallucinating and throwing out some bad facts. That reporter ultimately was dismissed. And then hearing the reporter's side of it was, they were using AI. They didn't have an editor check their story. There was no editor. It wasn't that reporter's decision. There was no editor to check the story. So there should have been. And that was not available to that reporter, who was actually new to the market, new to that beat. So they ran their story through AI to, tighten it up, make it better. And they say they did not notice the additional facts that the AI put into it. So it's kind of an unfortunate situation. And it gets back to, they should have had an editor, a human being who knew the market, who would have caught that. So I think reporters on tight deadlines might be tempted to turn to AI for some things. I've used it as a thought starter for headlines. I have used it to say, can you make this thing tighter? And some of the suggestions I've used and some not. I've never directly lifted from it. So it can be a guide and it can be helpful. I think you will see it in newsrooms when it gets to the point to where it's creating stories, and we've seen that happen already. That's not.
Yeah, I think Kim is right on with her points, and I would add that because newsrooms are shrinking, because there are fewer reporters in newsrooms, they're being asked to do more, right? And so the pressure to get those scripts turned in, to get a show on the air, it kind of boggles my mind, knowing that there was a lot of pressure. There's always pressure, right? To get it on the air and to get it right, and to not have phone calls afterward, people, challenging what you've written, because as Kim says, reporters by and large want to get it right. I would say more than by and large. Most reporters are in the business of reporting because news is important, because they respect the difference between conjecture and facts. And so with AI, I can see it being a tool that can be very helpful. I look at it in a very simplified way, kind of Google made easier, right? So
Yeah.
it's a tool for research, but it's only, it can maybe help you with understanding how facts could fit together or what a narrative might look like. But ultimately, a journalist is responsible for what goes over the air, and if or a producer, and if a generic written story begins to raise eyebrows, I think it's worth digging into because it's a very slippery slope, and there can be incredible pressure to maintain, do more, to do more with less. And I think this is going to be a challenge, and it's going to further erode the credibility of newsrooms. And so it's a very challenging kind of thing.
And I've been hearing some talk about AI might be increasing the prominence of journalism at some point. So, for example, all these AI search engines are very much replacing, SEO with now it's the generative search, and they are highlighting and putting a preference for third-party, news sources, which I think a lot of people are trying to do the sponsored and editorial content to get into these news sources. Do you think that there's, or how do you view the line now between editorial content and branded or sponsored content?
It's blurry. I don't know if that's what I think. What do you think, Kim? I mean, I think for consumers, it's getting more and more difficult to know the difference. And on the PR side, I think the question is, what is the client looking for? And what are the expectations? We used to, this has become again another slippery slope because you might see the word sponsored content in very, very small font, right? And I don't know that my parents are going to notice that. And so it's concerning, and if a client says, what about sponsored content? Could we do something? So I think there's a whole broader set of questions to evaluate. Is there any way that a sponsored piece is going to come back to bite us, right? Are we writing it deceptively? I like to know the difference between a news article and a paid message, right? And when a paid message starts to look or intentionally tries to look like a news article, then we're just being deceptive. So I struggle with that, and I don't know that. I think it merits a really long conversation with the client in terms of how we're trying to get their messages out. Is there really no other option? I mean, is there no way? I always am of the belief that getting a story, having a reporter report on take your pitch and report on it. The reporter saw it as something worthy of news, and it's written. That's why it's written for news. And I think there's greater credibility with it. Now, there's a place for advertising. There's a place for sponsored content. But I think you should make sure you knock on all the doors first in the newsroom and see if there isn't a news story behind, because I think it carries more weight.
I agree. The news consumer has to educate themselves as well. So you're talking about, Ryan, the person who picks up the newspaper and may not notice that sponsored thing. Industry publications, you see this a lot, the whole pay to play thing. And it ranges from outright, I have worked in situations where with certain publications, there's one that has nothing to do with any pineapple clients, but there's a publication out there that deals a lot with e-commerce. And so you can pay to be one of their experts, and they will interview you for articles and whatnot. They will not allow you to just put stuff in there that's not accurate or not part of another story, but it gets you exposure. And then I've seen organizations like the London Times. Forbes has its various councils that executives can pay to be a part of, and they can submit thought leadership pieces. As a reader, You can't, hopefully people are aware of that, but not everybody is. So you really have to be very discerning about what you are reading, where it's coming from, and why. And it gets harder and harder. I think AI will make it harder too.
Mhm.
It could be tempting for clients to want to see their CEO on the cover of this glossy magazine. And so there are ways to sort of determine what the actual value of that might be. If it's just a vanity thing that that would look good in your waiting areas or in different places around the office, that's you're paying money for people to see what they already know, or maybe it's certainly going to help an ego, but I don't know what kind of value there is in terms of, so it's just all about who's going to see it and what impact will that have in terms of advancing the objectives of the client. So you have to take it with a grain of salt.
So I think let's bring this whole conversation in the full circle piece. Knowing all of the challenges that are happening in the newsroom and the media landscape right now, do you think earned media is where PR clients need to be? And if not, how else can and what other opportunities exist for these clients to get their messages out?
I think earned media is always great when you can get it, but you can't rely on it, right? It's very, very difficult. And it depends on your industry. If you're an industry, healthcare, there's always something newsworthy going on in healthcare, right? But if you make widgets that are part of a piece that goes into another larger thing, it's very hard to get attention in earned media. So I really am a strong proponent of using the channels that you have control of, which yes, is LinkedIn and things like that. I think there are great opportunities there. And as we see earned media changing and kind of have to take into account that there's less and less of it to get a piece of, that you have to look at these other channels.
No question. I agree with that 100%. I mean, for me, it comes down to know your audience. And if you're, as Kim talked about, if you're developing a little piece of technology that is part of a larger system or equipment in a manufacturing process, that might be a tough pitch for a local TV station, right? But it might be the exact pitch. It might be perfectly suited for a trade publication that is in that industry, and social media, there's a place for that too. I mean, there could be a social media, a whole narrative or platform that would support that kind of messaging. So, understand where the best opportunities are and go for the low-hanging fruit first and then go from there, right? If your CEO, for example, wants coverage for a business line that is launching a new product or a new way of solving a problem, what I like to do is find out, what does the CEO read? What are they looking at? What are the publications that you find in that person's office? Because those are the publications that matter to the CEO and to the leadership team. So go after those publications, right? Give that a go first. There are different ways to do it, but you have to figure out who's looking at what you're sending.
You're always better getting a bigger percentage of your target audience than a huge percentage of a lot of people who don't care about you. You can have an executive get a quote in the Wall Street Journal, but 99.9% of the people reading it aren't interested in that company per se. But if you can get into an industry publication, to Ryan's point, or if you can create a wonderful thought leadership piece that really gets into the nuts and bolts of what your target audience needs, and you understand what they need, then that can be more effective.
Mhm.
Budget plays a part, so you want to make sure you get as
Yeah.
much bang for your buck as possible, and trying to get the home run in a major national publication. There are times to go for that, but you could run out of budget pretty quick trying to get that one, and you may as well be more precise, more focused, and start there, and then maybe that builds into something else. But
Mhm.
yeah, it's important in terms of figuring out your strategy.
Well, I'd like to have us wrap up with something more fun and lighthearted. Ryan, you just kind of mentioned it's really great to know where Your executives are getting their news. So how about you two? Where do you guys get your news?
Kim, I'll let you go first.
Okay. A variety of sources. So I still, the old school New York Times and Wall Street Journal, the local newspaper, the local alt newspapers, a variety of newsletters. I've become a big fan of newsletters to try to get headlines that I'm interested in. I look at threads, but you're hopping down one silo as opposed to another silo.
Yeah.
So a wide variety. I actually don't watch much local TV news anymore. By the time it airs and by the time national news airs, you've already seen the story.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have to admit the same. I don't watch as much local TV anymore. When I got out of it, I continue to watch local news, mostly because, I sort of like to relive the excitement of getting a show on the air and then picking out things that I saw that could have been done better. And then I just started to kind of like, I need to give that a rest a little bit. And to be honest, the challenge for newscasts, as Kim mentioned, is being relevant and timely, right? We're seeing now news is 24/7. It's constantly changing and updating, and waiting for the 6 o'clock news is tough because something breaks at 10 minutes to 6. It's hard to get that in, right? I mean, it's doable, but it's hard. And so I like to look at as many sources as possible. I coach my parents to do the same. And I think it's important to know the difference between commentary and talk shows and news, hard news being reported by people who train to do it. And so, but have I gone down a rabbit hole and started looking at all the weird stuff on TikTok or Facebook? Yeah, no, I've done it. I consume just like anybody else. iPhones have changed who we are. I think they've changed our brain chemistry a little bit. And so it's clicks and likes and subscribes and algorithms. That stuff is, it'll be interesting to see how this evolves. But I don't think there's a replacement for good writing, honest, factual reporting. People say it, but I'm going to echo it. Facts do matter, and facts aren't what one person believes and what another person believes. Those are opinions, and belief is not fact. Fact is what. Well, here we go. I'm going down a rabbit hole, but those are my issues.
Facts are not talking points. Yeah.
No,
Facts aren't talking points.
Facts are facts.
Right. And you can't say, well, that's how I view it. And someone else says, well, I view it differently. That's perfectly okay. Just understand that facts really aren't negotiable. They are a set, information that's been proven and demonstrated and repeated. And so I look for those kinds of news sources, and that's so all the sources that Kim talked about. And then it doesn't mean I don't look at social media. I sure do.
Well put, Ryan. I think you are exactly right. And that's kind of the nice wrap up of everything. Facts matter. The human factor matters. Being interesting and relevant and meaningful and useful matters. And it will always matter. Well, thanks for taking the time to talk to me today, guys. Great to hear from you. We'll continue to tap you guys for your expertise whenever possible, and I'll see you on emails soon.
Thanks, Cassie.
Thanks, Cassie.
All right.